Hello everybody, welcome back to the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. This is just going to be a very quick update regarding something I found online for these trucks, just to share my thoughts on this component. As you may or may not know, this Ram 1500 truck does come with the factory front independent suspension, and because it's four-wheel drive, it uses very common CB drive shafts in the front end. There is a company, RCV, they make very, very heavy duty and high quality front axle shafts for this truck. Now, you may or may not know from previous videos, if you guys are watching, this truck is going to get a very small suspension lift in the front, between 2 to 4 inches, depending on the ride height I choose. It is going to put a little bit of a higher stress on those front CB drive shafts, because when you lift the vehicle, you increase the operating angle of those parts, and the first thing that usually goes is the rubber or the silicone boot that covers those joints. Basically, when the vehicle drives down the road, those drive shafts are spinning, and the higher angle you have in those components, the more flex that those boots that are covering those joints that are full of grease, they have to allow that movement. So the higher angles, the quicker those boots are going to wear out. Doesn't matter whose vehicle you're talking about. Any vehicle with that design, those things should be very close to parallel with a very small angle. However, when you lift a truck such as this, that's just nature of the beast, because you cannot avoid that unless you're going with drop brackets and you're dropping the differential down. However, when you go with a lift like that, the suspension lift that you gain, you're also losing because you're dropping the cross member down, which is one of the reasons I'm just going with pretty much a 2 to 4 inch lift, that I'm going to be extending the control arms down, and the front middle portion of the vehicle with the differential assembly is going to be moved up, so to increase ground clearance. That is my solution for this problem. These drive shafts apparently are really heavy duty. They are some of the most heavy duty components you can buy. I've read a lot into this in the last couple of years. However, one of the reasons I would not get one of those for this vehicle particularly, because you might be able to upgrade the strength of those components. However, when you put the vehicle into situations where, let's say, the front drive shafts would snap or break or fall apart from excessive use or abuse or shock loading those parts, instead of breaking those drive shafts, now you're going to be placing the stress onto the next weakest link. Most of the information I've read on this vehicle, and there are a lot of videos about people when they misuse these trucks and they tend to put the power down where you have to be very gentle on the throttle. What happens is there's a stub shaft in the front differential assembly. Basically, this truck has a very similar design to many other manufacturers. It is an aluminum alloy case that is holding the front differential assembly together. So that case itself, when put under extreme shock load, can crack. There's a stub shaft for the front axle disconnect that can actually shear or break. And unfortunately, when you're upgrading the front CB drive shafts, if they don't break, if they are not the weak link, actually the front differential might have a serious issue. And from past experience from previous vehicles, if I do have a problem with the CB drive shafts, they are actually not difficult to replace. You can buy them pretty much anywhere across the country, because here where I live in Canada, in North America, Chrysler dealerships, Jeep dealerships, Fiat Chrysler automobiles, or Stellantis as it's now called, they're all over the place, and these parts are readily available in pretty much any and all aftermarket part providers, such as Napa or PartSource or Canadian Tire or anything like that. Once again, this vehicle is not designed to be a rock crawler. If you need something very heavy duty, it's always recommended to go with a Ram 2500. They do come with very heavy duty components. It has a solid front axle which has universal joints in the front instead of these CB drive shafts. It is a much stronger design, and the angles of attack about those components are a lot less severe than these independent suspension trucks. So these things have to be driven very carefully, and myself, I only drive in four-wheel drive when it is absolutely required, and I'm very easy on the throttle. Especially coming from my previous vehicle, which was a 2011 Jeep Wrangler JK. That one had a solid front axle, and pretty much the drivetrain was very heavy duty compared to the engine. The engine was roughly a 205, 210 horsepower engine, and it had a solid front axle, pretty much cast iron and steel construction. The rear axle was also a solid axle, and transfer case is very heavy duty. Usually you don't get into situations with stock tire sizes or even smaller lip kits or slightly larger wheels and tires where you don't really get into problems about breaking components. Now this truck, on the other hand, is kind of limited by the fact that it does have a large Hemi V8. This has pretty much 400 plus horsepower, 400 plus pound-feet of torque, depending on where you're getting these specifications from, but it has a very deep gear reduction regarding the transmission, transfer case, and axle ratios. And unfortunately, the weak link is, in my view, the front axle. It is an independent suspension, which is not really designed for very heavy-duty use. They could from the factory if they wanted to, however, the target for this vehicle is not a rock crawler, like I said. So the components are pretty much good for stock use. However, when you get into situations where your suspension is going to be lifted very high and you're putting large, heavy, big diameter wheels and tires on them, and you're asking too much from those components regarding you're putting too much stress on them, something is going to break, unfortunately. Now, one way to prevent that is to go easy on the throttle. Again, it's always, when you're off-road, the motto applies where you only go as fast as necessary and as slow as possible. That means you're not abusing the vehicle, you're trying to go easy on everything, because off-road driving, such as going to mountains or even campsites where you're in the wrong situation, if you give too much throttle, I've actually seen a lot of videos on this where the front axle shafts tend to just snap like toothpicks, because it's a big engine and this is a heavy truck, and when you're putting a lot of load on those components, the weak link in the system is the front CV drive shafts. Now, if you were to upgrade to those very heavy duty, also very expensive RCV axle shafts, the weak link is actually the front differential, which is actually going to also leave you stranded. However, that component is not that easy to replace on the side of the road. When going off-road with this vehicle, I've mentioned in previous videos, I am going to take a lot of spare parts, as it's always a good idea. I have to look into it, I'm not quite sure, but I believe the left and the right axle shafts are the same part number. So whichever side, if and when does break, I will have a spare, which is very easy to remove and install. Basically, you take apart the front ball joint, upper ball joint, and the wheel comes off. You have to undo a large axle nut, and everything should come out quite easily and reinstall in a few minutes, and away you go. So that's one of the reasons I would never get one of those aftermarket axle shafts for suspension design like this. Yes, they're very heavy duty, however also extremely pricey, so whoever can afford that, that's great. However, you're just moving the weak link to another component of the vehicle. That's my take on those parts. They're really nice. Whoever can afford them, more power to you. But for somebody like me, I will rather stick with the OEM parts and drive a little bit easier. And if anything does break, it'll be easy, cheap, and quite simple to replace those parts. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you guys agree or disagree, let me know below. We can have a nice conversation about these things. It's always fun to talk about automotive stuff and share with the community. Brainstorm together to see what people can come up with. Hopefully you guys can use this information to however it benefits you. Thank you for listening again. Give it a thumbs up, and if you like what you see, subscribe. There's a lot more content coming to this channel. So thanks again, take care, good night for now, bye.